Court of Appeals found Rwanda is an unsafe country, because under those circumstances, Rwanda could return that refugee to Afghanistan. And that is one of the huge risks of this, is that we are going to see people who desperately need safety coming from countries which I think all of us, your listeners included, would agree Afghanistan is not a safe country for a lot of people. But we can see people being returned there, because once we've sent them to Rwanda, everything is done under Rwandan law. And therefore, if they make the decision to refuse that application, they can remove somebody back to Afghanistan, for example.
This is going to come out of the Supreme Court. If they think that the government's plan for Rwanda is unlawful, on what grounds might they do so? Will it be the repeat of last time, which basically found that Rwanda is not a safe country? Is that what they're looking at? Is that what they're trying to clarify?
That's going to be the main area that they're looking at on this, is whether or not Rwanda is a safe country or not. It was found during the Court of Appeals case that there was too great a risk of people, genuine refugees, being removed to unsafe countries, because Rwanda, for example, has a 100% refusal rate for Afghans, Syrians, Yemens. So that's going to be the main area. Other bits were brought into the case during it that could see some changes to that and could see it refused on other grounds, more about the individual processes going on with that and whether or not Rwanda is able to even be considered as a country to remove anybody to.
Daniel, when you say that there's been a 100% refusal of Afghan and Syrians from who directly apply for asylum in Rwanda, if I've understood this correctly, does this not change because the UK is doing a deal with Rwanda? I mean, Rwanda are receiving money in order to take asylum seekers. Is that not going to influence their acceptance rate, if you like?
It most likely won't, because what this deal does is we're paying Rwanda to take people from the UK, but they are then processed through Rwanda's asylum system. Now, Rwanda has a very limited asylum system anyway. It can only process a maximum about 500 claims per year as it stands. So that change isn't going to happen. It's not like they're being processed through the UK system or how we view refugees. It is still going through their same procedures, their same systems. And they have, under that, they will have the sovereign right to say, no, we are not accepting this claim. So we can pay them to take people who then can't come back to this country under any circumstances. But at the end of the day, the Rwandan authorities can still refuse those claims. They still have to process them through Rwandan law.
Okay, so an Afghan refugee who gets on a boat in France, comes to the UK, is then, should Rwanda be found lawful and go ahead, is then put on a plane from the UK, taken to Rwanda. Rwanda refuse them, as you say, that they have refused so far Afghan and Syrian refugees. What happens to that refugee in Rwanda?
Well, this is where the Court of Appeals found Rwanda is an unsafe country, because under those circumstances, Rwanda could return that refugee to Afghanistan. And that is one of the huge risks of this, is that we are going to see people who desperately need safety coming from countries which I think all of us, your listeners included, would agree Afghanistan is not a safe country for a lot of people. But we can see people being returned there, because once we've sent them to Rwanda, everything is done under Rwandan law. And therefore, if they make the decision to refuse that application, they can remove somebody back to Afghanistan, for example.
Daniel, let's again just imagine that come Wednesday, the policy is found to be lawful and it goes ahead. Is that the end of the legal troubles for the government and particularly the Home Secretary?
Not even remotely. It actually increases them for them. From the perspective of the government, it's not, either way they look at this, it's not a great outcome for them. And not only politically, because they can only really remove maximum 200 people if it's found lawful as it stands, but also legally, because in the original case where the courts found that the government could go ahead with it, that's why I went to the Court of Appeals, even then it was ruled it had to be on an individual case-by-case basis. And that means the individual cases can still be taken to prevent people being deported. So what they can feasibly see is a mass influx of anybody they're trying to remove from the country can go forward to try and challenge that in theory in the courts. So it's, rather than being the end of the cases, it would open the door to far, far more cases being brought against the government.
So essentially the government can go ahead with it, but then every individual case, every person they want to put on that plane to Rwanda will have their chance to have their day in court against the government.
In theory, that could be where we end up seeing. If people can find good cause that someone should not be removed and courts decide to take the case, then we'll see those cases go through. We're liable to see more cases going to the ECHR, European Court of Human Rights, as it stands. So this is by far and away not the end for the government. It could actually, rather than being this great PR thing that they want to show off, it could end up being just a huge millstone around their neck, as the very people who they're trying to show, look, we're removing people, start saying that it can't happen.
But then, Daniel, are we, and some people have mentioned this before, that if the government wins the case, let's say on Wednesday, that then in order to prevent being tangled up in courts, even though the Rwanda scheme has been found to be lawful by the Supreme Court, then the next logical step might be the withdrawal from the ECHR. How likely do you think that will be?
I can't say how likely. With the way things go, I really don't know how likely it is. I think there was some very serious concerns to be raised if they do, not just to do with refugees. There's, as many people have brought up before, the Good Friday Agreement relies upon the UK currently still being in the ECHR. A lot of our trading obligations could potentially be hit by leaving it. The knock-on effects and the ramifications, not just to human rights and to anybody's protection of human rights in the UK, would be detrimental, but it would also have serious potential impacts upon the UK as a whole, with how we deal with our international partners. So it's a very, very serious thing the government needs to consider of what the repercussions of that are going to be. We've seen a lot of very performative politics coming forward. If they're talking about the ECHR, they really need to be sitting down and thinking very carefully about how much damage are they prepared to do to the country as a whole for that.
Daniel, a lot of supporters of the Rwanda plan are saying, look, it's not just about the numbers. You've mentioned, and we know, for example, that Rwanda is not incapable, it can only process around 500 asylum applications a year. We would only be able to send about 200 per year. It's literally a drop in the ocean when you look at the just over 100,000 that are in the asylum backlog. But a lot of supporters of the Rwanda scheme are saying, look, it's not about the numbers so much as it is about the deterrent. If you know that coming to the UK, either on a small boat or any other means, but definitely not through a legal route, means that you'll never be able to stay in the UK because eventually you're going to be sent to Rwanda or somewhere else, then that is going to act as a deterrent. Would you agree with that point of view?
I wouldn't. And more to the point, the Home Office's own analysis from about 10, 13 years ago also doesn't agree with that analysis. They showed that deterrents don't work. Because people are coming to a country, whether the UK or anywhere else, they come for very specific personal reasons. For the UK, it's normally language or community ties, family. Now, those don't rely upon you actually having asylum. So what you're more likely to see under these circumstances is people going into their communities and going underground. So they're more likely to be exploited even on that basis. It doesn't stop people coming. What it does from government's perspective, it stops people being recorded as asylum seekers. So they'll be able to say, look, we're seeing this reduction in people applying for asylum. It doesn't actually change the numbers, though, because you haven't addressed why people are coming, why people feel safe in the UK. And they're not coming to feel safe in the UK because of some intangible reason. They're coming for very, very good reasons. If you've got family somewhere and you're fleeing a war zone, that's where you're going to feel safe. You're going to feel safe with your family, whether you can get asylum or not. So it's not going to act as a deterrent. In fact, when it was first announced, we saw an increase of people trying to come to the UK. So it's really not an argument that can hold weight at this point in time.
Daniel, thank you so much for giving us your time. I'm sure we'll be speaking post the decision. So look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks very much for having me.
Daniel Sohege, the expert on migration, refugee policy and director of the Human Rights Advocacy and Support Organisation.